The elegant crystal glasses caught the warm light from Uncle James's chandelier as he pointed his fork at me across the mahogany dining table. Gandalf, when are you going to stop playing with stocks and get a real job like normal people? His voice carried that familiar condescending tone that made my stomach tighten. Leave investing to the professionals who actually know what they're doing. 23 family members sat around us, their conversations gradually fading as they turned to watch this annual Christmas humiliation. I kept my face neutral, continuing to unwrap the tie-shaped present in my hands, while my phone buzzed urgently against my leg. The caller ID showed Patricia Williams, CFO. Her voice cut through the dining room chatter like a blade. Sir, your anonymous investor is withdrawing all $297 million immediately. 8 years ago, everyone thought I was throwing my life away when I dropped out of college during my junior year. My finance professors insisted that successful investing required decades of experience and institutional backing. Uncle James led the family chorus of disappointment, shaking his head whenever my name came up at gatherings. But while they were talking, I was studying. I spent 18 months living in my studio apartment, consuming everything I could find about market analysis, company fundamentals, and economic indicators. My walls became covered with charts, tracking commodity prices, interest rate fluctuations, and sector rotations. I read every annual report from Fortune 500 companies, memorizing cash flow patterns and debt structures until the numbers told stories in my head. My breakthrough came when I realized most retail investors focused on daily price movements instead of long-term value creation. I developed a systematic approach to identifying undervalued companies with strong management teams and competitive advantages. My first successful investment turned $3,000 into $12,000 over 18 months. The second turned $15,000 into $42,000 over 2 years. By my 25th birthday, I was managing a portfolio worth $1.8 million. I incorporated multiple shell companies through different states, creating layers of legal separation that kept my identity completely anonymous. Every investment flowed through this network, ensuring that target companies never knew who was providing their capital. 5 years ago, I discovered Sterling Manufacturing while researching industrial suppliers in the Midwest. The company had been family-owned for 60 years, producing specialized components for automotive and aerospace industries. Their financial statements told a desperate story, declining revenues, mounting debt, and cash flow problems that threatened immediate bankruptcy. What caught my attention was their underlying value. Sterling owned valuable real estate, possessed strong customer relationships, and maintained manufacturing capabilities that competitors would pay premium prices to acquire. The company simply needed capital injection and strategic guidance to survive the economic downturn. I spent 3 weeks conducting due diligence, visiting their facilities undercover as a potential vendor, and interviewing current and former employees. Everything confirmed my analysis. Sterling was fundamentally sound, but financially starved. The ownership trail led back to my Uncle James, though I had no idea he was involved when I began my research. He had inherited the company from his father-in-law and struggled to manage both the business operations and family expectations. Public records showed him taking larger salaries each year while the company's performance declined. I structured my investment through Pinnacle Capital Holdings, one of my shell entities. The legal documents specified that I would provide exactly $297 million in exchange for preferred shares and operational oversight rights. Uncle James would retain nominal control, while my representatives handled strategic decision-making. The transformation was immediate. We upgraded manufacturing equipment, streamlined production processes, and expanded into emerging markets. Within 2 years, Sterling had become profitable again. By year 4, they were industry leaders in 3 separate product categories. Uncle James took complete credit for this turnaround, giving interviews to trade publications about his visionary leadership and innovative business strategies. He never mentioned the mysterious investor who had saved his company from bankruptcy. At family gatherings, he would lecture everyone about proper business management while I sat quietly listening to him appropriate my work. My cousin Sarah had become a corporate attorney in Chicago, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. She often mentioned how impressed she was with Uncle James's business acumen, pointing to Sterling's remarkable recovery as evidence of his hidden talents. He really found his groove as a leader. She would say, unaware that every major decision was actually mine. Cousin Tom worked in Sterling's accounting department, a position Uncle James had created for him after Tom graduated from community college with an associate degree in business. Tom frequently shared stories about the company's mysterious benefactor, describing him as a guardian angel who appeared when things seemed hopeless. Grandmother Helen, the family matriarch, always watched these conversations with knowing eyes. She had built her own successful catering business from nothing during the 1960s and recognized the signs of genuine entrepreneurial thinking. Sometimes I caught her studying my face when Uncle James told his elaborate stories about business success. During tonight's Christmas dinner, the familiar pattern was unfolding. Uncle James held court at the head of his massive dining table, regaling guests with tales of his strategic brilliance while dismissing my investment work as gambling with other people's money. The irony was suffocating. My phone buzzed again. Patricia Williams was calling back, her voice tense with urgency. The CFO had no idea she was speaking to the very investor whose departure would destroy everything Uncle James claimed to have built. Uncle James excused himself from the dining room, claiming he needed to handle urgent business matters that couldn't wait until after Christmas. His face had turned pale when his phone started buzzing repeatedly during my call with Patricia. The rest of the family continued eating, but I noticed how his wife Margaret kept glancing toward the hallway where he had disappeared. Uncle James has been so stressed lately. My cousin Sarah mentioned cutting into her prime rib. He keeps getting calls at all hours about company issues. I offered to help review some contracts, but he said everything was under control. Cousin Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Actually, things have been weird at the office. Management keeps having closed-door meetings, and there are rumors about budget cuts coming after the holidays. But Uncle James keeps telling everyone that business is better than ever. Grandmother Helen set down her fork and looked directly at me. Gandalf, you've been awfully quiet tonight. Usually you have more to say when business topics come up. I chose my words carefully. I'm just listening. Sometimes you learn more by observing than by talking. The conversation turned to family updates and holiday plans. But I was mentally reviewing the withdrawal timeline I had established with my legal team. The process would take 72 hours to complete, during which Sterling Manufacturing would receive formal notification of the anonymous investor's departure. Uncle James would have exactly 3 days to find alternative financing or begin bankruptcy proceedings. 5 years ago, when I first invested in Sterling, the company employed 412 people across 3 manufacturing facilities. Uncle James had inherited a workforce that trusted the family name and believed in the company's mission. These weren't abstract numbers in a financial model. They were real people with mortgages, car payments, and children's college funds, depending on Sterling's continued operation. I had always planned for this moment to come eventually. My investment strategy never involved permanent ownership of any single company. The goal was to identify undervalued assets, provide capital for recovery, and growth, then exit when maximum value had been created. Sterling had reached that point 6 months ago, but I had delayed the withdrawal because I knew Uncle James lacked the skills to maintain the company's success independently. Now his public humiliation had forced my hand. I couldn't continue subsidizing his ego while he diminished my accomplishments in front of our entire family. Uncle James returned to the dining room 20 minutes later, his confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wine glass. Margaret noticed immediately. "Everything all right, honey?" she asked, her voice carrying the concern of someone who had been married long enough to recognize genuine distress. Fine, fine, Uncle James replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Just some year-end accounting issues that need attention. Nothing major. Tom leaned forward. Is this about the investor situation everyone's been whispering about? Some of the guys in accounting think there might be changes coming. Uncle James's face darkened. There are no investor situations. Sterling manufacturing has never been stronger. Anyone spreading rumors about financial problems is misinformed and should focus on their own responsibilities. But his phone kept buzzing throughout dinner, and each notification made him more agitated. Finally, he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need everyone to listen carefully. Uncle James announced, his voice cutting through the family chatter. Sterling Manufacturing is facing a potential challenge from our primary investor. This investor has been with us for several years, providing crucial financial support during our growth phase. The room fell silent. Margaret's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. The situation is manageable, Uncle James continued, but it may require some temporary adjustments to our operations. I wanted you all to hear this from me directly, rather than through rumors or speculation. Sarah set down her napkin. What kind of adjustments are we talking about? Possible workforce reductions? Delayed expansion projects? Maybe some facility consolidations? Uncle James's voice was steady, but I could see the desperation behind his eyes. Tom, your position is secure, but some of your colleagues might be affected. Grandmother Helen spoke into the silence that followed. How much money are we talking about? Uncle James hesitated before answering. The investor has contributed approximately $300 million over the past 5 years. If they withdraw completely, we would need to find alternative financing very quickly. The number hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. $300 million was more money than most of our family members would see in 10 lifetimes. The realization that Sterling's success depended entirely on this mysterious benefactor shattered Uncle James's carefully constructed narrative about his business genius. Do you have backup plans? Sarah asked, her legal training kicking in. Other investors lined up bridge financing options. Uncle James shook his head slowly. I've been working on developing relationships with institutional investors, but nothing concrete yet. The timeline might be challenging. Tom's face had gone white. Uncle James, my wife is 7 months pregnant. If the company has to lay people off, I said your job is safe. Uncle James snapped, then immediately softened his tone. We're not at that point yet. I'm exploring every option. But I could see in his eyes that he was lying. There were no other options because there never had been. For 5 years, Uncle James had been living a fantasy where his natural business acumen had transformed a failing company into an industry leader. The truth was that every success, every expansion, every innovation had been funded by my capital and guided by my strategy. Now reality was collapsing around him, and he was finally understanding what I had always known: he was not the business genius he pretended to be. After dinner, while the family gathered in the living room for gift exchange and holiday movies, I retreated to Uncle James's home office to make some private calls. The mahogany-paneled room was filled with awards and photographs celebrating Sterling Manufacturing's recent achievements. Every plaque on the wall represented success that Uncle James had claimed, while my actual contributions remained invisible. My first call was to Marcus Chen, my primary financial advisor and the architect of the shell company structure that had kept my identity hidden. Marcus confirmed that the withdrawal process was proceeding on schedule, with formal documentation being delivered to Sterling's corporate offices on December 26th. The timing is unfortunate, Marcus noted. They'll receive the notification during the holiday shutdown, which means they won't have access to banking services or legal counsel until January 2nd. That shortens their response window considerably. My second call was to Jennifer Park, the private investigator I had hired to conduct ongoing due diligence on Sterling's operations. What she told me made my stomach turn. Your uncle has been treating company funds as his personal checking account, Jennifer reported. Over the past 18 months, he's charged approximately $1.4 million in personal expenses to corporate accounts. The mansion you're sitting in right now was purchased using a company loan that has never been repaid. She detailed a pattern of financial misconduct that went far beyond poor judgment. Uncle James had been systematically draining Sterling's cash reserves to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford on his legitimate salary. Company credit cards paid for luxury vacations, expensive cars, and even Margaret's extensive jewelry collection. The board of directors is completely in the dark, Jennifer continued. Your shell company structure gave him autonomous control over day-to-day operations, and he's been filing fraudulent expense reports to cover his tracks. I hung up and stared at the family photographs covering Uncle James's desk. Pictures of company picnics, retirement parties, and holiday celebrations showed hundreds of Sterling employees who had no idea their jobs depended on the whims of a man who was stealing from their paychecks. Grandmother Helen appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might need some caffeine. You look like someone who's processing difficult information. She settled into the leather chair across from Uncle James's desk, studying my face, with the same perceptive intelligence that had built her catering empire from a single food truck. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Known what? Don't insult my intelligence, Gandalf. I've been watching you during these family gatherings for years. You never react to James's stories the way someone would if they were hearing about business strategies for the first time. You respond like someone who already knows the details because you lived through them yourself. I sipped my coffee, considering how much to reveal. Grandmother Helen had always been the family's moral compass, the person everyone turned to when difficult decisions needed to be made. If anyone deserved the truth, it was her. Sterling Manufacturing would have filed for bankruptcy 5 years ago without outside intervention, I said carefully. Uncle James inherited a company that was drowning in debt and losing market share to more efficient competitors. And someone provided the capital to turn things around. She continued, her eyes never leaving my face. Someone who understood the business well enough to make exactly the right strategic decisions. The investment was structured anonymously to protect both parties, I replied. Grandmother Helen smiled. You always were the smartest one in this family. Even as a child, you could see patterns that everyone else missed. When you dropped out of college, I knew you had a plan. James thought you were throwing your life away, but I could see you were building something. From the living room came the sound of children laughing and adults discussing the merits of various holiday movies. Our family was enjoying their Christmas celebration, while the foundation of their financial security was crumbling in real time. What happens now? Grandmother Helen asked. That depends on Uncle James, I replied. He can either acknowledge reality and accept help, or he can continue pretending to be something he's not until everything collapses. She nodded slowly. Pride has always been James's weakness. His father-in-law built Sterling through decades of careful planning and conservative management. James inherited success and convinced himself he had created it. My phone buzzed with another urgent message from Patricia Williams. Sterling's CFO was discovering the extent of Uncle James's financial mismanagement as she prepared documentation for the investor withdrawal. The audit trail was revealing expenditures that couldn't be justified by any legitimate business purpose. When I rejoined the family in the living room, Uncle James was fielding more phone calls in the kitchen. I could hear fragments of conversation as he pleaded with various business contacts, describing Sterling's situation in increasingly desperate terms. None of them were offering the kind of immediate financing that would prevent disaster. Tom approached me during a quiet moment, his face creased with worry. Gandalf, can I ask you something private? We stepped onto the back patio where the December cold provided privacy from the rest of the family. I've been working at Sterling for 3 years, Tom began, and I've seen things that don't add up. Uncle James takes credit for decisions that come from somewhere else. He'll announce a new strategy on Monday, but the implementation plans are always ready immediately, like someone else had already worked out all the details. Tom paused, studying my expression. The other thing is he spends money like someone who doesn't understand where it comes from. Last month he bought a new BMW and charged it to the company fleet budget. When I pointed out that we were over budget, he told me not to worry about accounting details. I listened without commenting, but Tom continued. My wife thinks I should look for another job just in case. But Sterling is the best employer in our area, and with the baby coming, I can't afford to take risks. Do you think Uncle James is telling the truth about having everything under control? Before I could answer, the kitchen door opened, and Uncle James stepped outside, his phone pressed to his ear. I understand your position, but this is a temporary liquidity issue, not a fundamental business problem, he was saying. Sterling Manufacturing has been profitable for 4 consecutive years. We're just experiencing a single investor departure that requires bridge financing. Whoever was on the other end of the call was clearly not interested. Uncle James's voice became more strained. What do you mean you need collateral? The company itself is worth 10 times what I'm asking for. Our manufacturing facilities alone are valued at over $50 million. The call ended abruptly, and Uncle James noticed Tom and me standing there. Everything's fine, he said automatically, but his hands were shaking. Just working through some temporary financing arrangements. Nothing that affects day-to-day operations. But his eyes told a different story. Uncle James was beginning to understand that 5 years of borrowed success was about to come crashing down, and he had no idea how to prevent it. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with fresh snow covering Uncle James's perfectly manicured lawn. I'd spent most of Christmas night researching Sterling's current financial position through my various corporate networks, and the situation was even worse than I had anticipated. Uncle James had scheduled an emergency board meeting for December 26th, calling in all 5 board members, despite the holiday. Through my network of corporate contacts, I learned that he was planning to present a modified version of the truth, downplaying both the investor withdrawal and his personal financial misconduct. Margaret cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had clearly been awake most of the night worrying about their family's future. Gandalf, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think James is in real trouble? I measured my words carefully. What makes you think there might be a problem? Last night, after everyone went to bed, I found him in his office going through financial documents. He was adding up numbers on a calculator, and when he saw me, he quickly put everything away. James never hides business information from me unless something is seriously wrong. Margaret poured herself a cup of coffee with trembling hands. This house, our cars, the country club membership, all of it depends on Sterling's success. If the company fails, we lose everything. We have less than $30,000 in personal savings because James always said the company was our retirement plan. The kitchen door swung open and Uncle James entered looking like he hadn't slept at all. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone facing inevitable disaster. Good morning, he said, attempting his usual cheerful tone but falling short. I hope everyone's ready for another family day. We have the board meeting this afternoon, but that shouldn't interfere with our holiday celebration. Margaret studied her husband's face. James, maybe it's time to tell everyone the complete truth about what's happening. The family deserves to know if their jobs and financial security are at risk. There's no risk, Uncle James replied, but his voice lacked conviction. I've been through difficult periods before. This is just another business challenge that requires strategic thinking. Tom appeared in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Uncle James, I've been thinking about our conversation last night. If Sterling really is in trouble, Maybe I should start looking for backup options. I can't afford to be unemployed with a baby coming. Uncle James's facade finally cracked. Damn it, Tom. I told you your job is secure. Why doesn't anyone in this family trust my judgment? The outburst stunned everyone into silence. Uncle James had always prided himself on maintaining perfect composure, especially in front of family members. Seeing him lose control was like watching a dam burst. Sarah walked into the kitchen at that moment carrying her laptop bag. I took the liberty of doing some research on Sterling Manufacturing's public filings. James, we need to talk privately about what I found. Uncle James's face went white. What kind of research? Corporate debt structures, asset valuations, and cash flow statements from the past 5 years. Also some interesting patterns in executive compensation and expense reporting. Sarah's voice had taken on the professional tone she used when delivering bad news to clients. Grandmother Helen joined us, surveying the tension in the kitchen, with her characteristic perceptiveness. It seems like this family meeting needs to happen sooner rather than later. James, whatever you're dealing with, we're stronger when we face problems together. Uncle James looked around the kitchen at his family members, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from concern to suspicion. The weight of 5 years of deception was finally becoming unbearable. Fine, he said, slumping into a chair. Let's all go into the living room and I'll explain the situation completely. 20 minutes later, the entire extended family was gathered in Uncle James's spacious living room. He stood in front of the fireplace looking like a defendant preparing to address the jury. Sterling Manufacturing is facing the potential loss of our primary investor. He began, his voice steady but strained. This investor has provided approximately $300 million in capital over the past 5 years, and they have decided to withdraw their funding. Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. $300 million was an almost incomprehensible amount of money to most family members. Sarah leaned forward. Who is this investor, and why are they withdrawing now? The investment was structured anonymously through shell companies, Uncle James replied. I don't know the investor's identity, and they've never provided a reason for their decision. The withdrawal process is already underway. Tom raised his hand like he was back in school. What does this mean for the company's employees? Uncle James hesitated before answering. We would need to implement significant cost reductions immediately. Workforce reductions, facility closures, possibly selling off valuable assets to maintain basic operations. Margaret spoke for the first time. James, tell them about the personal expenses. The room went completely silent. Uncle James shot his wife a look that could have melted steel. What personal expenses? Sarah asked, her attorney instincts engaging. Margaret's voice was barely audible. James has been using company funds for some of our personal purchases. This house, our cars, various other expenses. He always said it was a temporary loan arrangement. The revelation hit the family like a physical blow. Uncle James had not only mismanaged their financial future, he had been stealing to maintain his lifestyle. Grandmother Helen's voice cut through the silence. How much money are we talking about? Uncle James couldn't meet her eyes. Approximately $1.4 million over the past 18 months. But it was always intended as a loan against future profits. Sarah stood up abruptly. James, that's embezzlement. If Sterling goes bankrupt and creditors start auditing the books, you could face criminal charges. The family erupted into heated conversations as everyone tried to process the magnitude of the crisis. Uncle James had not only destroyed their financial security, he had potentially committed felonies that could send him to prison. Tom looked like he might vomit. Uncle James, if the company collapses and investigators find evidence of financial misconduct, won't that affect everyone who worked there? Our reputations, our ability to find other jobs. Uncle James finally lost his composure completely. I never meant for any of this to happen. Sterling was supposed to recover on its own after the initial investment. I thought I could repay everything before anyone noticed. Grandmother Helen's voice was cold as winter air. James, you've endangered everyone in this room. Our family's reputation, Tom's career, Margaret's financial security, all of it. And for what? So you could pretend to be a successful businessman. Uncle James looked around the room at the faces of his family members, seeing disappointment and anger where he had once commanded respect. The truth was finally out and there was nowhere left to hide. But he still didn't know the most important truth of all. The mysterious investor whose departure would destroy everything he had built was sitting right there in his living room, listening to every word. I waited until the family meeting ended and everyone dispersed to process what they had learned. Uncle James retreated to his study while Margaret went upstairs to lie down with a migraine. The house felt heavy with the weight of revealed secrets and uncertain futures. I knocked on the study door around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Uncle James was sitting behind his desk staring at spreadsheets that showed Sterling's financial position without my continued investment. The numbers told a story of immediate bankruptcy and total collapse. "Come in," he said without looking up. "I suppose you want to discuss how this affects your relationship with Tom." I closed the door behind me and took the seat across from his desk. "Actually, I want to discuss how this affects your relationship with me." Uncle James finally raised his eyes, confusion replacing despair on his face. "I don't understand." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder containing documents I had prepared months ago in anticipation of this moment. The first page showed the corporate structure of Pinnacle Capital Holdings, including my signature as managing partner. Uncle James stared at the document for several seconds before the implications registered. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally pure shock. "You're the anonymous investor," he whispered. "I've been Sterling Manufacturing's primary investor for 5 years, I replied calmly. "Every dollar of the $297 million you mentioned came from my investment portfolio." Uncle James's hand started shaking as he flipped through the documentation. Bank transfer records, board resolutions, strategic planning documents, all bearing my corporate signature or showing transfers from my shell companies. "But you're just a kid who plays with stocks," he said, his voice barely audible. "You dropped out of college. You don't have any real business experience." I leaned back in my chair, watching him process the destruction of his entire worldview. "I've been managing investment portfolios since I was 22 years old. My personal net worth is approximately $43 million. Sterling Manufacturing represents about 6% of my total holdings." Uncle James set the documents down with trembling hands. Why did you invest in my company if you knew I was incompetent?" "Because Sterling had excellent fundamentals beneath the poor management," I replied. "Valuable real estate, strong customer relationships, quality manufacturing capabilities. The company just needed capital and strategic guidance." "Strategic guidance that came from you," Uncle James said, understanding finally dawning. "Every major decision over the past 5 years originated from recommendations by my consulting team. Equipment upgrades, market expansion, operational improvements, all of it. You implemented my strategies and took credit for the results." Uncle James buried his face in his hands. "Jesus Christ, Gandalf. The whole family thinks I'm some kind of business genius. Board members come to me for advice. Industry publications quote my insights about manufacturing trends. None of which you actually developed," I said without malice. "You've been living in a fantasy where your natural abilities transformed a failing company. But Sterling's success was always artificial, dependent on my continued capital and guidance." Uncle James looked up at me with something approaching desperation. "What do you want? Money and apology? I can fix the personal expense situation. I can repay every dollar I borrowed." "With what money?" I asked. "You don't have $1.4 million in personal assets. Your house is mortgaged to the company, your cars are leased through corporate accounts, and your stock portfolio is worth less than $50,000. The reality of his situation was sinking in. Without my continued investment, Uncle James would lose not only his company but also his personal lifestyle. Everything he owned depended on Sterling's success, and Sterling's success depended entirely on me. There has to be a way to work this out. Uncle James said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. The family, the employees, the community, they're all depending on Sterling. You can't just destroy hundreds of lives because of a personal disagreement. I studied his face, seeing desperation, but no genuine remorse for the years of condescension and public humiliation. James, this isn't about revenge. It's about the fact that you've proven yourself incapable of managing a company responsibly. Your embezzlement alone disqualifies you from continued leadership. Uncle James stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward into the bookshelf. Fine. I made some mistakes with company funds, but that doesn't give you the right to destroy everything. I built relationships with customers, developed strategic partnerships, created value that goes beyond just money. You didn't build anything, I replied calmly. You were a figurehead implementing strategies developed by my consulting team. Every customer relationship, every strategic partnership, every innovation came from work that I funded and directed. Uncle James began pacing behind his desk, his desperation transforming into anger. So what's your end game here? You reveal yourself as the mystery investor, humiliate me in front of the entire family, and then walk away? Leave 400 people unemployed just to prove how smart you are. I had anticipated this response. Uncle James's pride wouldn't allow him to acknowledge his incompetence even when faced with overwhelming evidence. He would rather see Sterling collapse than admit he needed my help to succeed. I'm willing to continue my investment under modified terms, I said, pulling out a second folder. Complete management, restructuring with you removed from all operational authority. Professional oversight of financial controls to prevent future embezzlement. Restitution plan for misused corporate funds. Uncle James snatched the document from my hands, scanning the conditions I had outlined. His face reddened as he read through the requirements. This is humiliating, he said. You want me to become a powerless figurehead in my own company. Admit publicly that I've been incompetent. Submit to oversight like some kind of criminal. You are a criminal, I replied. Embezzling $1.4 million is a felony. The only reason you're not facing prosecution is because I'm the primary victim and I haven't filed charges. Uncle James threw the contract onto his desk. I won't do it. I won't let some college dropout turn me into a laughingstock. Sterling Manufacturing is my legacy, my family's heritage. I'd rather see it destroyed than handed over to someone who doesn't understand what it means. I stood up, gathering my documents. Then that's exactly what's going to happen. The withdrawal process completes in 48 hours. After that, you'll have approximately 2 weeks to find alternative financing before bankruptcy becomes inevitable. Uncle James's face was purple with rage. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy lives without consequences? The family will never forgive you when they learn what you've done. Tom loses his job. Margaret loses her home. Hundreds of employees lose their livelihoods, all because your ego couldn't handle some friendly criticism about your investment hobby. I paused at the door, looking back at a man who still couldn't understand that his own incompetence and criminal behavior had created this crisis. James, you have one advantage in this situation, I said. You know who I am, but the family doesn't. That gives you 48 hours to figure out how you want to explain what's about to happen. I left him sitting alone in his study, surrounded by awards and photographs, celebrating success that had never actually been his. The truth was finally out between us, but Uncle James still had one last card to play. The question was whether his pride would allow him to destroy the entire family's respect for me rather than accept responsibility for his own failures. I should have anticipated that Uncle James would choose destruction over humility. When the family gathered for dinner that evening, his demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the desperate, pleading man from our private conversation. In his place sat someone who had found a new source of confidence and was preparing to use it. I need everyone's attention, Uncle James announced as Margaret served a dessert. I've discovered some important information about Sterling's situation that changes everything. Sarah looked up from her apple pie. Did you find alternative financing? Better than that, Uncle James replied, his voice carrying a vindictive edge that made my stomach tighten. I've learned the identity of our mysterious investor. The room fell silent. Tom set down his fork and leaned forward expectantly. Uncle James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The person who has been funding Sterling Manufacturing for the past 5 years, the person who is now withdrawing their support and potentially destroying 400 jobs, is sitting right here at this table. Every head turned to look around the room. Family members studying each other's faces for signs of hidden wealth and deception. It's Gandalf, Uncle James said, pointing directly at me. Our own family member has been secretly manipulating my company, taking credit for business decisions, and now withdrawing his support out of pure spite. The accusation hit the family like a bomb. Shocked silence gave way to confused murmurs as everyone tried to process this revelation. Grandmother Helen was the first to speak. Is this true? I had hoped to reveal the truth under different circumstances, but Uncle James had forced my hand. Yes, I am the anonymous investor in Sterling Manufacturing. The room erupted into chaos. Tom looked like he had been slapped. Margaret started crying. Sarah immediately pulled out her phone, presumably to research the legal implications. Uncle James stood up, his voice rising above the family commotion. For 5 years, this manipulative little schemer has been controlling my company from the shadows. Every business decision, every strategic choice, every success that we celebrated was actually his work. And now, because I hurt his feelings at Christmas dinner, he's decided to destroy everything out of revenge. That's not true, I said calmly, but Uncle James wasn't finished. He let me believe I was running my own company, while he pulled the strings like some kind of puppet master. He watched me give interviews to trade publications, accept industry awards, and build a reputation based on his work, and he enjoyed every minute of it because it fed his ego to know something the rest of us didn't. Tom's face had gone white. Gandalf, is this why you never seemed surprised by Uncle James's business stories? You already knew everything because you were making the decisions yourself. Uncle James seized on Tom's reaction. Exactly. He's been sitting at these family dinners for years, listening to us praise achievements that were actually his letting us believe in a version of reality that was completely false. And the whole time he was planning this moment when he could pull back the curtain and humiliate us all. Margaret looked between her husband and me, her face streaked with tears. Gandalf, if you've been supporting the company all this time, why are you stopping now? Don't you care about what happens to the employees? Before I could answer, Uncle James jumped in with his twisted version of events. Because he's arrogant and vindictive. He can't stand the fact that someone called him out for playing with stocks instead of getting a real job. So he's decided to punish the entire family by destroying Sterling Manufacturing. Sarah had been quiet during Uncle James's attack, but now she looked up from her phone with a different expression. James, I've been reviewing Sterling's financial records while you were talking. The personal expense irregularities we discussed this morning total $1.4 million. If Gandalf has been the primary investor, then you've been stealing from him for 18 months. Uncle James's confidence faltered slightly. Those were loans against future company profits. Legitimate compensation for my management services. Embezzlement, Sarah corrected firmly. You took money that belonged to the company's investor without authorization. That's a felony regardless of your intentions. Grandmother Helen had been listening to everything with growing understanding. James, let me see if I have this correct. Gandalf invested his own money to save your company from bankruptcy. You took credit for the success that his investment made possible. Then, you stole over $1 million of his money for personal expenses. And now you're angry because he's choosing not to continue funding your incompetence and criminal behavior. Uncle James's face reddened. He manipulated the entire family. He let us believe a lie for 5 years while he secretly controlled everything. That's not normal behavior. That's the action of someone with serious psychological problems. Tom had been processing everything in silence, but now he looked directly at me. Gandalf, I need you to explain this from your perspective. Because right now, it sounds like you deliberately deceived our entire family while playing games with our livelihoods. I stood up knowing that this moment would determine how the family viewed me for the rest of our lives. 5 years ago, Sterling Manufacturing was 2 months away from bankruptcy. James had inherited a profitable company and driven it into the ground through poor management and excessive personal spending. 412 people were going to lose their jobs. I pulled out the folder of financial documents I'd brought to dinner. I invested $297 million of my own money to save those jobs. Every strategic decision that transformed Sterling from a failing company into an industry leader came from my consulting team. James implemented our recommendations and took full credit for the results. Sarah examined the documents, her legal training evident in how she analyzed the corporate structure and investment timeline. These records show that Gandalf's investment came with specific strategic requirements. James wasn't just a figurehead. He was contractually obligated to implement certain business practices. Uncle James scoffed. So he admits to manipulating my decision-making for 5 years. He admits to saving your company and 400 jobs, Grandmother Helen corrected sharply. The question is why he's withdrawing his support now. I looked around the table at my family members, seeing confusion, disappointment, and anger in their faces. Because James has been embezzling company funds to maintain a lifestyle he can't afford. Because he's been lying to investors, employees, and family about the company's actual financial position. And because his pride prevents him from accepting the professional management oversight necessary to prevent future misconduct. Tom leaned forward. What kind of oversight are you talking about? I pulled out the contract I had offered Uncle James earlier. Professional financial controls to prevent embezzlement. Independent board oversight of major decisions. Restitution plan for misused funds. James would retain an executive position but lose autonomous control over company resources. Uncle James snatched the contract from Tom's hands. He wants to humiliate me publicly, force me to admit incompetence in front of employees and industry colleagues, turn me into a powerless figurehead in my own company. Sarah read through the contract terms carefully. Actually, this seems reasonable. Gandalf is offering to continue his investment under standard corporate governance practices. The oversight requirements are similar to what any institutional investor would demand after discovering financial misconduct. Margaret wiped tears from her face. James, maybe we should consider this. If Gandalf is willing to continue supporting Sterling, and if it means the employees keep their jobs? Absolutely not, Uncle James said firmly. I won't be dictated to by someone who has been manipulating our family for years. Sterling Manufacturing is my responsibility, and I'll find a way to save it without surrendering control to a college dropout who thinks he knows better than everyone else. Grandmother Helen's voice cut through the tension like a blade. James, you've had 5 years to prove you could run Sterling successfully on your own. The only reason the company survived is because Gandalf provided the capital and strategic guidance you couldn't. Your pride is about to destroy 400 jobs and bankrupt your own family. Uncle James looked around the table, seeing that family opinion was turning against him. His last desperate gambit was to make me the villain, but the evidence of his own incompetence and criminal behavior was too overwhelming. Tom spoke quietly, his voice heavy with disappointment. Uncle James, I think you need to accept Gandalf's offer. My wife and I can't afford for Sterling to collapse. If there's a way to save the company and the jobs we have to take it, Uncle James stared at his nephew, the person whose future he was supposedly trying to protect. So you're siding with him against me? I'm siding with 400 families who need their paychecks, Tom replied, including my own. The family meeting ended with Uncle James storming out of the dining room, leaving the rest of us to discuss the practical implications of what had been revealed. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Uncle James's pride wouldn't allow him to accept defeat gracefully, and he still had one final card to play. The next morning brought news that Uncle James had made his choice. Instead of accepting my offer to continue funding Sterling under professional oversight, he had called an emergency press conference to announce that the company was closing permanently due to investor abandonment and family betrayal. Standing in front of Sterling's main manufacturing facility, Uncle James told local reporters that an unnamed family member had withdrawn crucial financial support for personal reasons, making continued operations impossible. He portrayed himself as the victim of a vindictive relative who valued ego over employee welfare. The story dominated local news throughout the day. "Mysterious investor destroys local company," read the headline in the evening paper. Uncle James had successfully shifted public blame away from his own incompetence and criminal behavior, painting me as the villain in Sterling's destruction. But Uncle James had underestimated both my resources and my determination to protect the employees he was using as pawns in his ego battle. While he was giving interviews about family betrayal, I was implementing a plan I had developed months earlier in anticipation of this exact scenario. By noon on December 28th, my legal team had filed incorporation papers for Sterling Industries LLC, a new company structured to purchase Sterling Manufacturing's assets immediately upon bankruptcy. Every piece of equipment, every customer relationship, every patent and trademark would be acquired and transferred to the new entity. More importantly, every Sterling employee would receive offer letters for identical positions with Sterling Industries, including full preservation of seniority benefits and pension rights. The transition would be seamless for everyone except Uncle James, who would no longer have any role in the company's operations. Tom was the first family member I called with the news. "You mean everyone keeps their jobs?" he asked, his voice filled with relief. "Everyone except James," I confirmed. "The new company will be managed by professional executives with backgrounds in manufacturing and operations. No more family drama, no more financial misconduct, no more incompetent leadership." Tom was quiet for several seconds. "What about Uncle James?" "This is going to destroy him professionally." "James destroyed himself professionally when he chose pride over responsibility," I replied. "I gave him the option to remain involved under proper supervision. He chose public humiliation instead." The news of Sterling Industries LLC spread quickly through the community. Employees who had been facing unemployment suddenly had job security again. Customers who depended on Sterling's products could maintain their supply relationships. The economic impact on the local community would be minimal. Uncle James, however, was discovering the consequences of his final gambit. Industry colleagues who had respected his apparent business acumen were now learning about the embezzlement, the investor withdrawal, and the company's true financial history. His reputation as a manufacturing executive was evaporating in real time. Sarah called me that afternoon to discuss the legal implications of Uncle James's situation. "The district attorney's office has received the financial documents you provided," she said. "They're opening a formal investigation into the embezzlement allegations. James could be facing criminal charges regardless of what happens to Sterling." Margaret had moved out of the mansion, taking only personal belongings and leaving behind everything purchased with company funds. The house would be sold to provide partial restitution for Uncle James's financial misconduct. She was staying with grandmother Helen while she figured out her next steps. "I should have known something was wrong," Margaret told me when we spoke privately. James was never good with money before Sterling's turnaround. Suddenly, he's buying expensive cars and talking about investment strategies he'd never shown interest in previously. I convinced myself he had learned from his father-in-law's example. Grandmother Helen invited me to dinner on New Year's Eve, just the two of us in her small apartment above the catering business she still operated at 82 years old. The contrast with Uncle James's mansion was striking, but somehow more comfortable. I'm proud of you, she said as we shared a simple meal of soup and sandwiches. Not because you're wealthy or because you saved those jobs, but because you handled an impossible situation with integrity. I had been questioning whether I'd made the right choices throughout this ordeal. I destroyed Uncle James's life, his marriage, his career, his reputation, all of it. Grandmother Helen shook her head. James destroyed his own life through years of lies, theft, and arrogance. You gave him multiple opportunities to accept responsibility and make things right. He chose pride over redemption every single time. She was right, but the victory felt hollow. I had proven my business competence and exposed Uncle James's incompetence, but the cost had been enormous. Our family was fractured possibly permanently. Uncle James would likely face criminal prosecution. Margaret was starting over at 60 years old with minimal savings. 6 months later, Sterling Industries LLC was operating successfully under professional management. The company had expanded into 2 new product lines and hired an additional 47 employees. Tom had been promoted to accounting supervisor, a position that better utilized his education and gave him oversight responsibilities he had never been allowed under Uncle James's leadership. Uncle James pled guilty to embezzlement charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months in federal prison. The restitution agreement required him to surrender all assets purchased with company funds, including the mansion luxury cars and country club membership. He would be released with nothing except the Social Security and pension benefits he had earned before inheriting Sterling. Margaret found work as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit organization, earning less than she had been accustomed to, but taking pride in honest employment. She had filed for divorce during Uncle James's trial, citing irreconcilable differences and the discovery of financial deception she could never forgive. The family gradually healed, though relationships were permanently changed. Tom and Sarah maintained close contact with me, appreciating how I had protected their financial security when Uncle James was willing to sacrifice them for his ego. They understood that my initial deception had been necessary to maintain the anonymous investment structure that protected everyone involved. The most important lesson I learned from this experience was that competence without humility becomes dangerous arrogance. Uncle James had possessed some legitimate business skills, but his inability to acknowledge his limitations had transformed minor shortcomings into catastrophic failures. Success requires not just intelligence and hard work, but also the wisdom to seek help when facing challenges beyond your capabilities. I also learned that family loyalty has limits. Supporting someone's destructive behavior isn't love. It's enabling. True loyalty sometimes requires difficult conversations and hard choices that protect the greater good over individual pride. Sterling Industries continues to thrive 5 years later, now employing over 600 people across 4 facilities. The company has become a case study in successful business turnarounds, though most people don't know the full story of how close it came to complete destruction. Uncle James was released from prison 14 months ago and now works as a night security guard at a warehouse outside the city. He has never apologized to the family or acknowledged his role in creating the crisis that destroyed so many relationships. Perhaps pride is a harder habit to break than I realized. Tom's son was born healthy and strong, named Michael, after the grandfather he'll never meet, but whose legacy of honest work and family dedication continues through his father. Tom often tells me that becoming a parent has helped him understand the importance of building something lasting rather than just impressive. The Christmas dinners at Grandmother Helen's apartment are smaller now, but more genuine. We've learned that success isn't about accumulating wealth or impressing others. It's about creating value that makes other people's lives better. The respect that matters most comes not from what you own, but from how you treat the people who depend on you. Sometimes I wonder if there was a different path through this crisis, one that could have preserved family unity while still addressing Uncle James's incompetence and criminal behavior. but I've come to accept that some people would rather destroy everything than admit they need help. The only choice you control is whether you enable their destruction or protect yourself and others from the consequences. The most valuable lesson is this: true strength isn't about proving you're right. It's about taking responsibility for outcomes even when other people's pride prevents them from doing the same. Success means nothing if it comes at the expense of your integrity, but integrity means nothing if it doesn't protect the people who depend on you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between loyalty to family and doing what you knew was right? Sometimes the people we love most are the hardest ones to help, especially when their pride prevents them from accepting the support they need. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating family conflicts and business challenges. Share this with someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you think about the difference between supporting someone's success and enabling their destructive choices. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction, even when they can't understand your decision.